This is what we're staring at. We're looking down the barrel of a Mao-inspired world. Okay? Where I come from, living under the tutelage of Mao Zedong isn't my first pick. Okay? What we have seen the tip of the iceberg of, it's sedition, it's treason, it's criminal, and you know what? Our media doesn't care. Our media doesn't care because they're in the same tank. They're in the same tank because they've taken the bribes from the same people. And you see, the problem is that our open society has been infected and been bought off and bribed by people who don't have our best interests at heart. And, America is the prize. America is the prize that the communists have been trying to win for, the better part of 100 years.
That whole assemblage of universal basic income, cashless society, unlimited currency creation by the Fed, all of that.
It's breadlines.
Yeah.
Universal basic income. It's central planning. Remember, central planning equals breadlines.
And universal basic income, if something can be given to you, it can be taken away. You can be cut off, just like that for doing, saying, or thinking the wrong thing, and you certainly can't keep the fruits of your labor.
That's what happens when you get to the front of the bread line, and the guy in front of you got the last loaf. No bread for you to come back tomorrow. No bread today. Take your chances tomorrow. Who wants to live in a world like that?
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance and Reluctant Preppers. We have a very popular returning guest. Rob Kirby is the founder of KirbyAnalytics.com. He's a proprietary analyst. He's with us again this Thursday, October 22nd, 2020. Rob, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Dunnigan.
Our viewers always look forward to having you on because you bring a very fresh and unabashed perspective of your assessment of the current situation economically, politically, financially. Before we get into viewers' questions that have been submitted ahead of your visit, could you give us your view of the landscape you and I were talking about right now that almost seems surreal or unimaginable in terms of what we're facing right now as a people looking at political and economic realities that we're dealing with?
Well, Dunnigan, my take on, I guess, the big picture, I'm absolutely gobsmacked with the media, both in the U.S. and in Canada as well. I mean, please rescue me. I need some reality. And, we've got the election coming up very soon now, not much longer to wait. And let's just hope and pray that things and the landscape doesn't completely and utterly melt down and deteriorate into, I want to say anarchy. I've got a feeling we're probably going to get a taste of it. But let's just hope the damage is kept to a bare minimum.
Yeah, there's a lot of concerns about unrest and volatility and disruptions that people are concerned about in this fourth quarter that we're heading into. We wanted to talk to you more about some of that. I guess I'll throw another log on the fire to the ones that you've already mentioned, and that's when we spoke with Ted Butler recently about the Department of Justice reprimands to J.P. Morgan traders, not to the company itself, but to traders for spoofing charges, that sort of thing. It seemed, again, as you mentioned, it's like when you talked about the press in their dereliction of duty as journalists, again, dereliction of duty of our regulators to actually put teeth into the enforcement. He said during the interview that to actually take action that might be on the scale of the damages that were apparently done went so much farther beyond this minor charges against specific individual traders of spoofing that it would potentially put J.P. Morgan out of business, and that would be unthinkable. We had a lot of people on our viewerships who wrote replies to that saying, why shouldn't criminal enterprises be put out of business? Is there no rule of law? That sort of thing. It seems to feed into the same theme that you're describing of, are we living in this dystopian reality where there is no rule of law?
Well, I'd like to offer this comment with regard to J.P. Morgan, the hefty fine that they were graced with recently, close to $1 billion for their what's been termed as market spoofing. And I just want to say this: where I sit, what J.P. Morgan has done and what they've committed hasn't been accurately reflected in the media whatsoever. Because you see, where I come from, Dunnigan, J.P. Morgan is an agent for the U.S. Treasury, and the U.S. Treasury has given J.P. Morgan the mission of suppressing the price of metals, gold and silver, in the futures markets, COMEX and LBMA. Their agent, or the go-between, you see, the Treasury does not deal directly with J.P. Morgan when they issue orders to suppress metals. The Treasury has an interface, which is the New York Federal Reserve Trading Desk, and the Treasury's wishes are passed on to the New York Fed Trading Desk, who then disseminates the orders to the commercial banks or the bank holding companies to do the suppressing of the metals. And that's, like, as I said, it's done through the futures markets. So the story that should be being made, or should be being presented by the press if we had journalism, is not that J.P. Morgan traders spoof the markets, because what J.P. Morgan is engaged in is effectively protecting the dollar, because it is the Treasury, and when I say the Treasury, it's not the visible, transparent side of the Treasury. It's the dark side of the U.S. Treasury, namely Exchange Stabilization Fund, which has a mandate since its creation in 1934. And its mandate is to basically defend the dollar and perpetuate the dollar as a viable vehicle for settlement of world trade accounts. And you see, everything that the U.S. Treasury's exchange stabilization done, by its very nature and by description, is of national security implications and is basically above top secret. And nobody dares speak a word about what the Exchange Stabilization Fund is doing in markets, because doing so makes you as popular as Edward Snowden, which basically means you're ostracized, and you can be literally charged with revealing state secrets and things that are above top secret. To speak of J.P. Morgan's actions and their supposed punishment, I mean, listen, J.P. Morgan was convicted of this ill-doing some time ago, Dunnigan, months ago, and let's just say that in the ensuing time, I have seen the very worst. I'm going to say the very worst blatant metals price manipulation that I've ever seen in the aftermath of J.P. Morgan being convicted. So, you see, this makes me wonder, this really makes me wonder if the Exchange Stabilization Fund or the people at the Treasury, knowing that there are catcalls in the alternative press that metals prices are rigged, they may very well have gone to J.P. Morgan and said, look, we have some brush fires here we have to put out. We're gonna give you a fine of $1 billion, and you're gonna admit some superficial spoofing charges. We're gonna throw a couple of your junior underlings under the bus, you're going to pay the fine, and you're going to continue doing exactly what you've been doing for the past 20 years. Because, Dunnigan, the more I look at it, that's exactly what's happened. JP Morgan was convicted. JP Morgan has paid a fine, or allegedly is going to pay a fine, and the price suppression of the precious metals and the counterintuitive moves in the price of precious metals continues unabated. And if anything, the interference, the blatant, obvious interference, is maybe increased. So, the message that's being telegraphed, in my view, is that crime pays. And, if crime pays, others around the world will sit up and take notice of that, and I believe they are and have, which means that other dollar alternatives probably have fires lit under them. Oh, gee, and I guess that's actually what's happened, because if you haven't noticed, the cryptoverse has taken off like a scalded cat, because they seem to have a bid under them right now that we haven't seen in a long time. And to me, this is the world thumbing their nose at America, which is appearing on the world stage to be a country with no laws, where laws aren't enforced and where laws don't mean anything. So that to me means, as we move through this election process, the dollar becomes very vulnerable. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I do believe that reserve currency status for the dollar is on the table. And I don't believe that the US dollar will maintain reserve currency status for much longer. So, what's being done here, in my view anyway, will not accomplish the devious goals of maintaining metals price suppression to keep the dollar appearing as it is a viable alternative or a viable go-to entity as the world settlement currency. So that's where I think we're headed.
Man, there's so many big topics there that you've broken open, and they all seem connected like parts of a mobile, and it all leads at the end inexorably to the fall of the U.S. dollar. You mentioned about crime pays. We're seeing that on every arena. We're seeing that on big name scandals about inappropriate behavior by big names that just seem to be Teflon. Just no matter what happens, whatever comes out, the people who are about to testify just disappear or whatever. One of the things you mentioned was about laws don't matter anymore. Well, yeah, we're seeing even police being told to stand down during destructive, dangerous, violent riots.
Sure.
And this is going on month after month.
What scares me, what bothers me, the message that America is sending to the rest of the world is that crime pays, and criminal acts are okay. And if you commit criminal acts, you won't be prosecuted. You won't be held accountable. Okay? And what this does, when America so blatantly exhibits this kind of immorality to the rest of the world, it makes the world a much more dangerous place than it otherwise would be. And that's of huge concern to me. It's of concern to me for the sake of my children, my grandchildren, and for humanity in general. It's of the deepest concern to me.
In addition to everything you just mentioned, circling back to our ability to even then talk about that, you and I are having this conversation. We're having it very publicly because this is going to be posted. It's putting us at risk. We've seen in the past 2 weeks dozens of independent media channels shut down off of YouTube, for example. I've gotten multiple recommendations from viewers, more than ever in the past, that I start posting my videos on some other streaming platform. So we've starting to upload them to Brighteon now. But this is a real concern, because if we can't even talk about these things, it's like, when does reality get reasserted? If the people who are observing it aren't in denial about it but want to speak up and can't, You mentioned also the compromising of our journalists, of our news media. We had Daniel McAdams from the Ron Paul Institute on talking about, he said if only people knew how far gone our mainstream media are, they would realize that we're farther gone than the Russian media was during the Soviet era, that sort of thing. Can you talk to us a little bit about that freedom, basically the malpractice of our media and the freedom of our ability, you and me and others, to be able to speak up about reality?
Well, listen, the First Amendment is under siege as far as I'm concerned. I find it hard to believe. I shake my head at it every time. It's becoming like, in a very dark sense, Dunnigan. It's becoming like comical. It's like I'm at a loss for words. Mm-hmm. I really am. But it's pathetic and it's sad. And that may be
one of the things that comes, if you can call it good, if it gets so blatant that people see it, perhaps. I mean, that's what I'm grasping at, is that this whole COVID lockdown, we've seen governors and mayors asserting unconstitutional overreach of their powers, and we've seen now what you're talking about is just this blatant blindsidedness by the mainstream media and other things. Will this wake up people who otherwise might have been in denial about it?
For the sake of humanity, Dunnigan, I hope so, but I'm not holding my breath. I mean, the fact that what has transpired has actually occurred, and the mainstream press would have us believe that there's actually a real race for the presidency. I mean, I have trouble, having that compute in my mind. I mean, Joe Biden is unable to complete or make a coherent sentence, and to stand on his feet and speak with cohesion, and yet we're still told that this is a race, and or that he's leading in polls. You see, I have trouble believing that in a legitimate poll that Joe Biden could possibly be leading in a poll. I mean, listen, there will always be diehard Democrats who would vote for whatever the Democratic Party put forward to lead the party. I mean, I'm at a point. The Democratic Party could put forward a bullfrog as their leader, and there are Democrats who would vote for the bullfrog over somebody who can speak the English language and can make a complete sentence. And it's not far from that in terms of what we really have, because the bullfrog might be actually more preferable as a leadership candidate than Joe Biden. And all I can say is if the Democrats are enabled to steal this election, shame on America and shame on humanity for allowing that to occur, because that will be the ultimate in terms of a blight on humanity. And I hope and pray that this doesn't happen. I hope and pray. But I mean, it's a pretty sad commentary, Dunnigan, that we're left in a spot where we need to hope and pray. But that's where I think humanity is, and that's the situation I think we're confronting. Hope and pray. Because the outcome could be very, very, very upsetting and very, very disastrous for humanity.
If we could turn our attention to some viewers' questions that have been submitted, there are some of them that expound on some of these questions, themes that we've already opened up here. Back to the topic of what's the behavior of central banks. You talked about the abject irresponsibility of the Federal Reserve as far as being the steward of the world's reserve currency and so on, that others are not going to, that's not going to be missed by foreign others who would want to maybe have a more reliable and more responsible world reserve currency and make choices away from the dollar. You mentioned cryptocurrency, there's others, and metals as well. Texas Kurdog says, Mr. Kirby, why is it that no one can ever imagine a world without the central banks? What would that world look like?
Well, it would be a realignment of power blocks that have ruled our planet now for, let's just say, probably 80 years. I'm going to say going back to basically to the establishment of the Bank for International Settlements in 1929 in Basel, Switzerland. And I mean, a world without central banks would make the Bank for International Settlements irrelevant. And the Bank for International Settlements is probably the most powerful financial entity on the planet. And, you see, when you are the head of something like the Bank for International Settlements with the ability to create money out of thin air at the drop of a pin, it gives you godlike powers. And you see, once human beings attain godlike power, they're very loath to give it up because it's a very powerful elixir. And having very close to the power of God, to be able to create and have your will and your every whim satisfied when you lift a finger, is a very, very powerful drug. Okay, and once you've been hooked on a drug like that, and somebody comes along and says, how would it be if we took your drug away from you? They'd be very, very loath to give it up. And that's where we find ourselves today. And is Donald Trump a narcissist? Yes. Is Donald Trump an egotist? Yes. But would Donald Trump pimp his own son or daughter out to make money? The answer to that is absolutely no. And you know what? We have definitive proof, despite what Borat might say. We have definitive proof of that. Donald Trump doesn't take a penny of the salary he earns being president of the United States. He does the job for free. Donald Trump has lost billions of dollars becoming president of the United States, a job he didn't really need. So, to say that Donald Trump is all in it for himself doesn't really hold a lot of water. So, get with it, guys, because, reality when it bites back, it can be a bitch.
We've got a question. You mentioned about the fate of the U.S. dollar going forward, and you've brought up that theme with us in the past. Pablo Pina asked a question. IMF's Georgieva mentioned last week a, quote, Bretton Woods moment. Would like to hear Rob's analysis of what she's referring to or hinting at in the coming future.
Well, the interview that is being referenced here is a lady from the IMF. I watched the interview, and this is somebody who is speaking, in my view anyway, out of both sides of their mouth. This is, I call it, the interview that is being referenced here, it might as well have come from the mouth of Marx. It's an interview that sings the platitudes of central planning, and it says that what we need is more central planning. And the IMF is and the World Bank and the United Nations, these institutions have all been created by, I'm going to say, they come out of Rockefeller doctrine, and these people are communists at their heart, and they preach the virtues of central planning and how the trouble that the world is in because of central planning can be solved with more central planning. And that's like saying the debt problem that the world has can be solved with more debt.
That's the same thing I was thinking. Yeah.
You see, it's a really common thread that runs through all these Marxists and all these Bolsheviks, the communists, the central planners. They think that more central planning is the answer. Well, Dunnigan, we know that central planning is a failed model because we have the glowing example of the Soviet Union that we can point to, and we can actually point to it. It's a big neon sign that tells us central planning is a guaranteed failure. It's failed everywhere it's ever been practiced. There is no working model of a successful central planned economy unless you want to look at China and say that what China's doing is good. I don't think what China's doing is good. I mean, China exported the virus that is destroying Western economies. China exported it to us. But do you notice that in China, you see, the Chinese were smart. They didn't allow COVID to destroy China. They put the clamps on and they kept the virus like siloed in China. But they allowed it to travel. And they infected us. And let's just say this. If available economic data is a way to measure anything, I'm going to suggest, and I'm going to state that it's fact, that the virus has disproportionately affected the West. The West and the Western economies have been much more adversely affected than China and their economy, and that's where it came from. So, you see, and if you believe that that's happened by accident, I'm going to say take your head out of a dark place where the sun doesn't shine and think about it again and have a coffee and wake up.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in on that one because, Doug Casey has written extensively about the impacts of the COVID phenomenon, and he talks about the primary and secondary and tertiary effect. He said the primary effect is medical, and that can be debated. It is being debated about how impactful that was as opposed to other major flus, that sort of thing. The secondary says is economic, and that's not so much because of the medical impact, it's because of the policies, of the lockdown policies and the cessation of businesses and the massive layoffs and that sort of thing. And then the third one is the tertiary, he said might be the most pervasive and longest lasting, and that is the loss of liberty, the loss of freedom, the overreach of government into intrusion and control of all aspects of life. Now, all of a sudden, that's echoing like, wait a minute, control over all aspects of lives. It's almost back to your notion about China perhaps getting an economic advantage tactically out of this. But what about that?
You see, Donegan, well, what about it? I mean, like, let's get down to brass tacks here, okay? Our media is China's bitch. Okay, this is why we don't get news, and this is why humanity is facing the prospect of subjugating humanity to the wonders of Mao Zedong. This is what we're staring at. We're looking down the barrel of a Mao-inspired world. Okay, where I come from, living under the tutelage of Mao Zedong isn't my first pick. Okay, what we have seen the tip of the iceberg of, it's sedition, it's treason, it's criminal, and you know what? Our media doesn't care. Our media doesn't care because they're in the same tank. They're in the same tank because they've taken the bribes from the same people. And you see, the problem is that our open society has been infected and been bought off and bribed by people who don't have our best interests at heart. And, America is the prize. America is the prize that the communists have been trying to win for, the better part of 100 years. And I just don't like where it's headed. And I hope and pray, and there we go back to the hoping and praying again, that America can rise to the occasion and defend their Constitution and defend the vestiges of decency. Otherwise, humanity's got a big problem, huge problem. So I hope and pray. And everyone should be hoping and praying, I believe.
Ordinary people with a shred of understanding of our country's founding values and the Constitution and all of that would look at not just the potential future administration, but the past several administrations, and have thought and said, it appears that what's been going on is what you would do if you were treasonous or if you were seditious, if you didn't have the best interests of our people or our country at heart, as far as both the encroachment on our domestic liberties as well as our foreign policy. It just seems like for the longest time, the powers that be have not been acting in the best interests of our country. Do you see that any differently?
No, look, the Bushes, the Clintons, Obama they're all checkers on the same board. Okay, they're just squares on the same board. These people have been compromised, and these people, I'm like, come on, they're part of a cabal who have enriched themselves at the expense of rank and file Americans, and they have no problems cozying up in bed with the communist Chinese. Okay, and it's a very sad thing to say. This has been a lot, like, there's a saying about the long and winding road or the slippery slope. America's been on a slippery slope, and humanity's been on a slippery slope, at least in the Western world, for quite some time. And we are all living witness to the power, the lucre of being able to create money out of thin air, and how dangerous that can be when you give human beings the ability to act like God. Okay? And when you give people the ability to act like God, you better have somebody at the apex of that structure that has some morality, that hasn't mortgaged their ethics, and that isn't on the take. But unfortunately, we have had leadership who checked their morality and their ethics at the door before they assumed their positions at the highest levels of power in not just your country, in Canada as well. We have dedicated globalists who have taken over and assumed control at choke points in the Western world where our way of life is really, really in danger. I'm going to say that because I truly believe that. So we need to do some housekeeping here, and we need to throw some of these bad actors back into the pond or the swamp where they came from, because they do not intend or have good wishes for any of us.
Yeah, when we interviewed Wayne Jett from classicalcapital.com, and he's written about the need for the workers to be able to receive the wages and be able to put it in their pocket rather than the pocket of the system. That's another one of these threads that's interconnected with what you're saying, because when the authorities have the ability to create wealth out of, or not wealth, but currency out of nothing, it does steal life from everyone else. It makes our property not our own. That means our stuff that we worked for and gave up part of our life for is not our own, and they can create it out of nothing. It turns us all into serfs. There's a related question here from Dave L., who says, plenty of analysts give predictions on what will be used as barter when the ultimate banking system collapse occurs. Do you think that people will choose their own, quote, money within communities, states, etc., or do you believe the end result is already written and we are doomed to more globalist counterfeit currency?
Boy, it's a great question. I think barter is going to become a much bigger component of everybody's life going forward. I do believe that the globalists will try to push cryptocurrency or digital money on us, and I do believe that crypto or digital currencies will play a much bigger role in our lives 3 to 5 years from now, dramatically bigger roles than they do currently. But you see, I also believe that there will always be a spot for physical gold and silver because they have the lineage of being currency, real money for millennia, many millennia. And I don't see that changing. And just because some of these unscrupulous individuals who've been granted this godlike power to create gold and silver contracts out of thin air in infinite amounts does not mean that those promises of the underlying will be kept or that they're real. I mean, I can tell you that I have 8 million tons of gold, and I can write an IOU from Rob Kirby to Dunnigan Kaiser saying I'm good for 8 million tons of gold. But the reality is that's not real, because there isn't 8 million tons of anything that looks like gold anywhere in the world. But as long as I have a willing regulator who's maybe taking a bribe under the table, and that regulator says that we're going to give Rob Kirby the ability to write an IOU for 8 million tons of gold, and if they see no problem with me making that claim, because I've paid them enough money under the table to look the other way, then I seemingly get away with it. Well, but I don't really get away with it because I can't deliver on my promise. Okay, and all I do by being liable to another counterparty for 8 million tons of gold that doesn't exist, all I've done is dig myself a hole. You see, and there's a real world saying, when you dig a really deep hole, sometimes the best course of action is to put the shovel down. But you see, in our world, that's run by delinquent regulators that don't regulate, and criminals that would have us believe that it's okay to make such stupid claims, continue digging is the way of the day. But, I mean, you see, we live in a finite world with finite resources, but we have the creation of money that's infinite. And you see, it's the finite and the infinite. The resources are finite, but the money creation is infinite, and they don't gel. They don't fit. It's like putting saying that you're going to make infinite money coexist with finite resources is like saying you're going to take a square peg and you're going to bash it into a round hole. You're going to destroy the board because square pegs don't fit in round holes. And infinite money creation doesn't work in a world with finite resources. But you see, we have leadership that hasn't thought that through yet. And you see, and I'm going to suggest it's the working model of communism. Infinite money, finite resources. You know what it leads to? It leads to bread lines, and it leads to people going hungry, and it leads to the implosion of the system. And that's exactly what happened in the Soviet Union.
Yeah. I'm not so sure that they haven't thought it through, is that they see that that's the outcome, and that's not undesirable for some people who see themselves to be in the leadership position of that dystopic future.
Well, when you're at the back of one of those bread lines, tell me how great that system is.
You got it. So if we could turn this now to another attribute that's being dangled out there as a carrot to get people interested in, and it's interesting because people who have ancestors that came from Cuba to the U.S. or from Argentina to the U.S. say, don't listen to these people that are selling you this socialist, wonderful utopia. It doesn't work out that way. But Holistic APRN says, what would universal basic income do to the country and the economy? How would it affect the housing bubble, the stock bubble? Would it have an impact on metals?
Well, we've seen sort of the entrails of what comes along with universal basic income when it was revealed by a federal liberal insider who got a whiff of the lowdown of what comes along with the universal basic income. And it was a liberal insider who revealed plans being dictated to the government of Canada as to how this unfolding virus situation and the collapse of the global economy, which it's starting to look like is a planned event. And this was an IMF-inspired plan, allegedly, that got revealed through a member of the Liberal government of Canada, that along with universal basic income, the IMF, it's proposed, would bail out and relieve all Canadians of all their debts. And along with that, Canadians would have to renounce their right to own any private property in the future. So you see, it's getting back to this thing I said. When you have central plan, if you move to the central, you see universal basic income takes you back to the central planned economy model that we know doesn't work because we've seen it fail. We saw it fail in Cuba. We saw it fail in the Soviet Union. We've seen it fail in North Korea. We've seen it fail everywhere it's practiced. And what does it lead to? Once again, I want to say it. It leads to bread lines. It leads to shortage. And it leads to ill health. And it leads to anarchy. And I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. And I'll be kicking and screaming the whole way if some crazy lunatics on the left try to take us down that road.
We've certainly heard that is in the cards for that plan of that whole camp. That leads us back to precious metals. You mentioned them in passing earlier. There's a question here from John Murney who says, we've seen the price of silver level off to just below $24 for the time being. Where do you think silver will be by the end of 2020 or in 2021? Obviously, he says he thinks we're going higher because of the currency printing, but just how much higher do you see?
Well, I think we're going higher in nominal terms. And the reason I think we're going higher in nominal terms is because the amount of money creation or dollar creation that has actually occurred, in my view and in my research, tells me it's dramatically higher than what's acknowledged. So, I mean, the Fed is acknowledged to have expanded their balance sheet by, I think, around $3 trillion in the last 6 months. I think the real amount of money printing has probably been tens of trillions. So, there's ample evidence also, Dunnigan, to suggest that the amount of money being created is dramatically, and I mean multitudes higher than the $3 trillion acknowledged by expansion in the Fed's balance sheet. I mean, if one looks at the churn that's occurring in Social Security trust accounts, as evidenced by the stellar research by PhD economist Dr. Mark Skidmore at Michigan State University, and his assets, let's just say with assets well under $500 billion, if you can believe that they even have those assets, they have turnover of many tens of trillions on assets that are allegedly being held for retirement accounts for Americans. Well, you know what, Dunnigan? Nowhere on this planet are retirement assets managed with a churn amounting to tens upon tens upon tens of trillions in turnover in a year, because that's not the way retirement funds are managed. And the fact that using government data, we know that this kind of churn is occurring, tells us there's something that's seriously, seriously amiss. And it points to like with a big neon sign. It's a big neon sign that flashes fraud. Fraud and likely money creation that is out of this world. Okay? And it makes a mockery of monetary aggregate data that's recorded and kept by the likes of the St. Louis Federal Reserve, the keeper of monetary aggregates in America. And I mean, when you've got $50-60 trillion in turnover in a couple of small retirement accounts in the Social Security trust edifice, and then make claims that the velocity of what's acknowledged to be or what's understated as our monetary stock, how can you have velocity of money at zero or at historic lows when you've got turnover of 50 or 60 trillion in two Social Security trust accounts? I mean, that's like saying I have 8 elephants under my desk, Dunnigan. And I mean, it's a complete lie, because I can only fit 1 elephant under my desk because I've done it before. I mean, it's so stupid. The whole notion of it's ridiculous. So anyway, it's brutal. And anyway, I'll say again, where does that leave us at the end of the day? Unfortunately, it takes us back to bread lines, shortages, and a world you don't really want to live in. Everyone needs to think it through, okay? Think through what you get if Joe Biden becomes president. Think it through. Do you want to get in a breadline? Joe Biden is breadlines, okay? And if you want to line up for your daily bread and be lucky if there's any when you get to the front of the line, that's what we're facing.
Yeah, that whole assemblage of universal basic income, cashless society, unlimited currency creation by the Fed, all of that.
It's breadlines.
Yeah.
Universal basic income. It's central planning. Remember, central planning equals breadlines.
And universal basic income, if something can be given to you, it can be taken away. You can be cut off, just like that for doing, saying, or thinking the wrong thing. And certainly can't keep the fruits of your labor. That's what happens
when you get to the Dunnigan. That's what happens when you get to the front of the bread line and the guy in front of you got the last loaf. No bread for you to come back tomorrow. No bread today. Line up tomorrow, spin the bottle, spin the wheel again, and take your chances tomorrow. Who wants to live in a world like that?
Yep.
That's what you get with central planning.
One of my best friends in high school, his family immigrated here from Russia, and he said that he wanted nothing to do with any system like that because he had seen that firsthand as people having to stand in line for cabbage or stand in line for anything, the basics of life, feeling helpless, feeling so depressed and discouraged that their own individual initiative didn't matter.
Yeah. Donegan, that's so true. And of course, you see, most people in I'm going to say North America, but most people in America and in Canada, we haven't experienced firsthand, or in our ancestry, we have not really experienced a modern day hyperinflation. But I find it very interesting, even amongst the people I know, people who have European roots, people who have particularly whose families have German roots, it's ingrained in their belief. Because I'll just tell you, people that I know who are German or who are of German stock, they lived through a Weimar hyperinflation in Germany. And you know what? They all own metal. They all own metal because they all had the experience in their own families of a currency losing all of its value. And they're very aware that metals survived that debacle and survived that meltdown. So, and that's why it's ingrained upon people with, I'm going to say, nearer European ancestry, that having some tangible wealth goes a long way when currencies fail, because they've experienced it.
Yeah, I also had a good acquaintance who I worked with for about a decade until just recently, and his family from India had his grandmother was widowed, and thank goodness that their family had set aside some significant physical gold holdings in their possession, and it was 2 generations they went just daily and weekly using up tiny bits of their holdings to be able to get through that and not be impoverished as a family, to make it through until people could start getting education and careers and be able to stand on their own 2 feet again. They went through some very difficult decades there as a family, but that's what held them, kept bread on the table, kept them together as a family.
Yep, you're here.
Well, we've been speaking with Rob Kirby. He's the founder of kirbyanalytics.com. Rob, if people want to follow your work, best way for them to get plugged in and to support you?
kirbyanalytics.com. That's where I live on the web. And, through the good graces of sites like yours, Donegan, I get to speak my piece every now and then. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity that good folks like yourself provide.
We're always grateful for your presence here with us. People look forward and anticipate your arrivals here because they know they're going to hear insights into what's really going on around us. And folks, if you want to keep track of Rob and our other guests, sign up for our free newsletter on libertyandfinance.com. Over on the left-hand margin, just put in your name and email address, and we'll get you on our email list. You'll see all of our interviews and any links that our guests may have, any articles that we discuss, any special offers, libertyandfinance.com, free newsletter. Rob, just as always, thank you for joining us here on Liberty and Finance.
Been my pleasure, and everyone fasten your seatbelts. Things should get very, very interesting in the very near term here with the election.
And one last thought it made me think of when you were talking about waiting in bread lines for central planners or left-leaning infinite money and infinite debt fans to give us our daily bread is, you said hope and pray. We do hope and pray to from whom we ask our daily bread, and it's not our government. So thank you very much for joining us, Rob.
Been my pleasure.
To acquire gold and silver, just go to libertyandfinance.com. When the main site comes up, click on Bullion Sales. That's libertyandfinance.com, Bullion Sales. You'll see my name, Donegan Kaiser, my phone number, and my associate, Kaiser Johnson, his phone number, our email, libertyandfinance@protonmail.com.